When it comes to academic writing, one of the key skills to master is integrating quotations. So in this video, I'll take you through some of the basic ways of doing so, and we'll be using the MLA style guide for our citations. What I have so far is a bit of a paragraph here. You can see this is about Michael Jordan and how he liked to stick out his tongue and so on. I also have a made-up quotation that we'll be using. It's a little bit long, so if I quoted all of it, I would need to do a block quotation, but I'm not going to do that here. And then I have a bit of a citation here as well, but obviously this is not correct yet, and we're going to have to fix this as we integrate the quote. Whenever we integrate quotations, there are typically three elements. So there is the signal phrase, those are your own words, signaling, pointing out that there's a quotation coming. Then we have the quote, and then we have the final citation. Let's start then with our first basic method, and I like to call this the short expression signal phrase. So let's make up a signal phrase here, your own words. You might say something like, as Edward Jones, that's the author of the quote, writes, and then we're going to get the quote. All right. Now in this case, maybe we'll just quote kind of part of this. There we are. And then at the end, we're going to remove the final punctuation unless it's an exclamation mark or a question mark. And we're going to add a final quotation mark, a space, and then we're going to put the page number in parentheses and add a final period. And as you can see, we have now a complete quotation. It's integrated. We have the signal phrase, we have the quote, and the citation. Notice that for the citation, we only added the page number. If we did not have the name before the quote, then what we would do is we would add Jones over here and a space. And again, this would be correct according to the MLA citation guidelines. Now, sometimes it happens that there's no page number. You may need to provide a short version of the title or something like that. But in general, I think you can see how this goes. You might recall that I refer to this as the short expression signal phrase. And what I mean by that is that we have somebody expressing something. So this verb here can be anything. It can be suggests, argues, points out, notes, right? The list goes on. And so somebody is doing an action. Somebody's expressing something. So that's why I refer to this as the short expression signal phrase. And often these start with as, but you don't need something like this. You could simply say Edward Jones writes, or if you want to provide the title of the article, you could say in the science, etc. So let's add that here. In the science behind athletes sticking out their tongues, Edward Jones writes. This can be a fairly long signal phrase, but the key is that we have somebody doing some kind of action, saying something, arguing something, and then the quote comes as proof. So to review then quickly some of the key features of this, notice that we have a subject and a verb. We have a comma, typically, before this quotation. When you quote this way, it's normal to quote a complete thought. So in this case, we have one or more sentences. We start with a capital, and if the first word was not capitalized in the original, you can always put square brackets around it. That's not necessary here, but you could do that. And then we need to make sure that the final punctuation is correct. So as I said before, make sure that you have this final quotation mark, remove the original punctuation, and put the period after the parentheses. All right, so that is our short expression signal phrase. Let's move on to what I like to call a formal introduction. And a formal introduction is basically a complete sentence, a complete thought, which kind of summarizes or explains what the argument is that you're making and how the quotation is the proof for that particular point. So you might say something like, scientists, there we go, scientists believe that sticking out the tongue either aids in concentration or coordination. And then we're going to have the same quote here, basically. So let me see. We can say the most credible hypothesis, blah, 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 blah. And maybe this time we actually want to quote a little bit more because we have this point about coordination. So let's put this behind here. I'm going to put quotation marks around it. It's starting to get fairly long, so it's almost long enough for a block quote and sort of borderline here, but let's just keep it as we have before. We remove the final punctuation. All of this is the same as before, and we add a final period. So what you can see here is that this kind of signal phrase ends in a colon. Again, we have a complete thought, so we tend to quote a complete sentence or multiple sentences. And then, as you can see, our introduction is a complete sentence as well, and it says something about the quote, and the quote acts as proof of what is being stated here. Notice that in this case, we don't have that short expression focus on so-and-so argues, right? We have not mentioned Jones here at all. We're using Jones's idea just to back up what we are saying. Now, you might have noticed that there's one thing missing, and that's Jones's name. So we're going to add this finally because we didn't actually mention it before the quote in our signal phrase. All right, so that is our second way to integrate quotes. We've seen the short expression, we've seen the formal introduction. Our next major way is the running quotation. The way a running quotation works is that your sentence and the quote are going to work together to create a sentence altogether. So let's just give an example here. We could say, many scientists believe that, and now we're going to quote something, such behavior aids in concentration. Okay, so you can see I've picked just part of a quote here, or part of a sentence here, and now we just need to add the citation. There we are. If we were to take the quotation marks off, so if I deleted this, this would be perfectly fine as a complete sentence. And that's the key to this running quotation. Your sentence runs into the quote, right? There's no punctuation in between. So there's no comma, there's no colon. Your sentence and the quote form one harmonious whole. And that's also why we don't have this first word capitalized here, because you wouldn't do that in the middle of your sentence. All right, those are the three major ways to quote: the short expression, the formal introduction, and the running quotation. I'd like to end with just pointing out a few variants, a few variations to this, because of course there are always exceptions. One of the things that you can do, for instance, is you could insert your signal phrase later. That's fairly unusual in academic writing, but in popular writing, like for magazines or newspapers, it's fairly common. So what you could do, for instance, is if you have this quote here, you could say something like, the most credible hypothesis, and then insert our signal phrase later. So we could say something like, writes Edward Jones. There we go. And then keep the quote going. And then we're going to add our citation at the end. So that's more unusual. It creates more of a feel of somebody talking to you, I would say. You have to be careful that if you stick the signal phrase way at the end here somewhere, it's hard for the reader because they don't know who's talking. And that's why in academic writing, we mostly put our signal phrase at the start, just because it helps the reader make sense of what is coming, right? What you are signaling towards. Another way to introduce the quote sometimes is with a very short phrase, which goes according to Edward Jones. And notice that in this case, there's no verb. So this is kind of similar to the short expression. It also ends with a comma, but there's no verb here. So it's just a slight variation. And then finally, sometimes you may want to continue after your quotation, but you have to be very careful when you do that. So let's do a running quote here first. You could write something like, some believe that sticking out the tongue helps with either concentration, that was one of the words in the quote, or coordination. And you can see how with the running quotation, you can often pick out particular words and phrases and kind of blend them together into one sentence. So I'm going to add our citation here, page 99, and I could keep going with my sentence. So I could say something like, but I believe that, and so on and so forth. If we took the quotation marks off, you could see that this was a complete sentence as long as you finish it. On the other hand, if I got rid of but, then this would be a comma splice. This would be two sentences stuck together with a comma, and there really should be a period. My advice is that when you have a quotation that's integrated like this, that you're very careful and cautious about continuing your sentence. If the quotation is fairly long already, then it's best often just to put a period and start a new sentence. And even in other cases, you have to be quite confident that you're going to do this correctly. But once you have some experience, then I think you can start to experiment more, and I think you can take this to new levels and do all kinds of things that you were maybe afraid to do before. Okay, that's it for the basics of integrating quotations.